light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Hu. Today I wanted to offer a few thoughts and reflections on what's sometimes called agreeing to disagree, or disagreeing agreeably. I've often said that one of the most important rights we have is the right to disagree. That if we ever lose that right, we'll lose our sense of individuality, of self-agency, and in a sense we'll lose the ability to grow, because it's by disagreeing and refining ideas that our minds and hearts and societies grow. It's by being challenged on a regular basis that we whittle away the things that may have served well in their time but aren't serving us well anymore. That we recognize we're all individuals on a journey of personal and spiritual growth, moving between this idea and that one, having some ideas that we hold very passionately and some about which we're quite ambivalent. Out of that, I sought to find a genuinely Christ-like response, a genuinely loving and wise response. And what I came up with was to say, we need the freedom to disagree, and we need some basic principles of civil dialogue, of how to talk about difficult things that about which people hold very passionate opinions, and that's fine that they do. But the point is, because it's about the behavior, not the identities, we need to be sure that we're talking about the behavior and not about who's acting that way now. All of that being taken into consideration, then, when in addition to seeing that it's not just the one example upon which I'm focusing, but it's anyone who behaves this way, to take that one step further so that we, by recognizing the behavior as the problem, we can look in the mirror and not be caught off guard if that behavior ever begins to surface within ourselves. To genuinely see racism, racism has to be present. If racism isn't present, I can look for it and I won't find it. Again, it's the basic point of not being the category, of being the individual. If you're not a racist individual, and you might not be, then you can identify the behavior of racism. You can do a really hard look in the mirror, and you can figure out whether it's there or to what extent it's there. If you insist that it is there, and you come to the evaluation of yourself with a bias that, of course, there has to be racism, I will find it no matter what, even if it's not there, you'll create it. And the point is not to say everybody is racist. The point is to create a world in which love and wisdom prevail and racism is not there. And toward that end, to create a world in which it's possible to disagree and to have different perspectives and different truths simultaneously existing. To say that this is my experience with Professor so-and-so, but it will not necessarily be your experience. To say that my experience is true and your experience is true and our experiences are completely different. Because the other frustrating thing perhaps about humanity is that every single one of us is a combination of good and bad qualities, going through multiple dimensions of being and multiple ways of being every day of our lives, and thereby providing to those around us radically different ways of experiencing who and what we are. Who somebody is as a professor may be completely different from who he is as a family member, or as a committee member, or as a church leader. Each of us is a multidimensional person, and there is one person who is consistent through all of that. But seeing only one facet of us, other people can get radically different perceptions. The person who meets me in one context will say he's this kind of person, and the person who meets me in another context will say he's that kind of person. And they could both be absolutely right. It kind of goes back to the 6 blind men and the elephant, that each different piece of the elephant needs to be considered in relationship to all the others until you have a complete perception of what a whole elephant looks like. There's virtually no one in my life who sees that many facets of me, though, and so in that sense, everyone I meet is at a disadvantage because they see a few facets, 1 or 2 facets, maybe half a dozen facets. I happen to have dozens upon dozens of facets. Like a polished gem, each of us has dozens upon dozens of facets, different ways of being. Not that we try to be different, and not that we really are different, but depending on how you turn the stone, depending on where you stand in relationship to the stone, different facets will light up. And if you shift 2 steps to the left, other facets will light up. And if you run around to the other side, other facets will light up. And it's all part of the same multifaceted gemstone. And each of us is a multifaceted gemstone, with different qualities showing according not to how we change, but according to the perspective of the person running around us. Every time their perspective changes, they'll see something different in us. Not because we changed, though, but because it was there. The first point is always address the issue presented rather than the person who presented it. There are dozens of different people who may believe in this or that issue, be it evolution, creationism, capitalism, socialism, Christianity, Islam, whatever one wants to name. The person speaking puts forth an idea, and we discuss the idea without attacking the person, because ultimately it shouldn't matter who said it, but only what the idea says, how cohesive the idea is, what supports the idea, and what does not support the idea. But in picking apart the idea, one might say, it's not that you're attempting to destroy the idea, it's that you're attempting to understand the idea. In the same way that taking a key-wound clock apart, and you look at all the gear wheels, you measure their diameters, you see which one is touching which other one, how the power from the spring is transferred from this wheel to that wheel to that wheel, how the number of teeth affects whether it will control the minute hand or the hour hand on the clock. You study the relationships between all the pieces. In a similar sort of way, when we present an idea, we need to study the components and the relationships between all the components in order to fully understand the idea. So, the first principle is always discuss the issue presented, not the person who presented it. The second one, maintain mutual respect at all times so that you can be respected also. If the other person chooses not to respect you in spite of having set down this ground rule that there needs to be mutual respect, that person tells the world about them, about who he or she is, and it does not need to become your truth. If they wish to conduct themselves in a way that's adversarial to good relationship, it will have to be their choice. It doesn't need to be your own. But in order to maintain civilized academic debate, it is essential that you maintain mutual respect at all times, that you respect the truth of their experience as being their experience, even if it's not your experience, and that you respect that the two of you can have completely different experiences and both of them be true at the same time, because they were in completely different contexts. The person who goes to see a lion in the zoo is going to have one experience. The person who gets attacked by a lion in the jungle is going to have a completely different experience. Which experience is true? Well, they both are, but they're in very different contexts, in different ways, different times and places. It's not, there doesn't need to be any argument over who's right or wrong, which is true and which is not. In both cases, each one needs to be able to say, I respect your experience as true, and I have an additional experience to add to our discussion, my own experience that offers a contrasting truth, and I understand that both are equally true. The third principle I came up with is, in the interest of maintaining open communication and ongoing dialogue, because there's never a last word, Never begin a response by labeling a person or perspective as being wrong. Instead, ask, upon what are you basing that statement? One of the very basic dynamics that comes into play almost constantly is to have every statement supported by something. To say, I'm basing this upon my reading of, or I'm basing this upon the experiment that I did, and this is what we did, this is how it turned out, this is what we measured. There needs to be support for everything. There's no a statement without support is the most unrespectable statement. If you have nothing to support it except your own opinion, you have to state it as such, and you have to allow that there is nothing particularly compelling about that, because no one will ever have exactly the same experience that you did. Very often in my times of self-reflection, when I think back on why I believe what I do, not just to know what I believe, but to know why I believe what I do, sometimes I don't always have very scientific reasons, but it's a step of personal growth, a step of greater awareness, greater consciousness, living life with more intention, and therefore a way of empowering myself to look hard at, yeah, but where did that come from? Because I don't believe there is an effect that doesn't have a cause. So if I'm, for example, responding very sharply to a particular situation, I might take some time to think about when was the first time I reacted that way, or when was the first time I felt that way, and see if maybe on a subconscious level I'm reliving some past moment of my life that was painful and that wounded me in some way, and that what this recurrence is really asking for is a way for me to be healed. And the other person in a later discussion may wonder why I responded so strongly to something they said, because my response may be totally out of balance with what they actually said. A reason that it would become comprehensible would be if they knew that I was responding as much to a past emotional memory as to words they said, and that completely without their knowledge they happened to use some terminology that resonated with or echoed or repeated some words that I heard within a very different situation in the past, and that subconsciously I may be applying the context of the past to the situation of the present and giving more of a reaction than the other person's statement actually warranted. And to consider that in reference to the other person as well. It's not that I'm wrong or they're wrong, it's just that we are both multidimensional people, so much so that the ways we're responding are reactions to more than just the immediate context. And it's important to remember in any sort of discussion where there are two opposing perspectives that the other person is just as much involved in a process of growth, or at least we hope so, as you yourself might be. And if they are more involved in growth than we find ourselves to be, maybe that's an invitation and an inspiration to become more involved with our own growth and to become more aware of what makes us tick. There's an awful lot of people going through life on autopilot without really thinking about why they respond the way they do. And sometimes they are able to catch themselves in the act, so to speak, and take a step back and say, why did I do that? And sometimes they need a caring, compassionate friend to simply point out, I see that you're very sensitive to this issue. I want to be sensitive to that, but I feel like the reaction I'm getting is more than the words I said warranted. Could you tell me more about what you are understanding, what you are feeling when you hear me say these words? I mean, all these things are oriented toward communication, toward the pursuit of wisdom, rather than just butting heads or trying to see who wins the argument. Nobody really wins an argument, because you may have, in a logical sort of way, you may have the last word in a particular discussion, but if you've lost the other person's goodwill and friendship, really nobody has won the conversation. You're both going away losers at that point. One person who has lost logically and the other who has lost relationally. Number 4, always assume that there is someone present who has good reason for disagreeing with what you're about to say, and therefore choose your words very carefully. The intention of academic debate is to be educational and to further the dialogue, to further wisdom, not to make somebody feel alienated, silenced, marginalized. Not to say, I'm sure we all agree on this, which basically means if someone's going to disagree with you, they're going to have to speak louder and more forcefully, because by that statement, you've just put pressure on them to be silent. We can put an idea out there and also get the benefit of different perspectives looking at it and saying, this is what it looks like from my perspective. This is how it's helpful, this is how it's unhelpful, this is something else I need to learn in order to benefit from what you've just said. Because once the words are said, you can't take them back. You can change them, you can add to them, but you can't take them back. They have become part of someone else's life experience if that person heard what you said. Number 5, remember to thank all participants for their contributions to the discussion and for being willing to participate in inherently uncomfortable activity in order to pursue a common goal of increased knowledge and understanding. It is the development and the wisdom and the love, after all, that are the true goals of any sort of civilized conversation. There are an enormous number of people in the world who go to great lengths to avoid conflict and to avoid tense conversations. People who choose to remain very, very superficial in their relationships with others, specifically because they don't want to get in any nasty conflict, they don't want to get involved in any interpersonal ugliness. The problem, though, is, to me, it's kind of like the metaphor of a garden. If my hands are dirty, it's because I've been working in the garden. If there is a certain drama and emotion and emotional up and down to my life, it's because I am involved in relationships and in the problems of life with others. And sometimes things go very well and we jump up high and cheer for joy, and sometimes things go the other way and we have to figure out how to own our contribution to the situation, how to infuse whatever good we can into the situation, and how to move on from that after we've done the grieving of whatever loss occurred. Everyone who participates in the discussion is a collaborator, and at times they may seem adversarial, but if both people are simply seeking the truth, it's as if to say we're all trying to move toward the center of the circle. And if they're moving toward it from the opposite side of the circle, give thanks that they are moving toward the center at all. That they were willing to even be present within the circle instead of running away from the circle and abandoning the conversation. Number 6, strive to understand and, if possible, to empathize with adversarial persons and positions, so that your own perspectives and understanding may not only be refined, but also increase in depth and gentle strength, avoiding any tendency toward arrogance or loveless domination of others. A civilized academic debate is not about playing king of the hill. It's not about dominating. It's about joining together and becoming family to each other, and understanding that whether we like it or not, we are all interconnected and the world is a shared space. And consequently, we do ourselves a much bigger favor by finding peaceful ways to integrate all the diversity and all the diverse perspectives. That whatever it is that brought this person to their adversarial perspective, if we had the same experiences, who knows, but we might make the same choice. We might not, but we might make the same choice. We might be the same sort of person as they are. And, it's kind of like the saying, there but for the grace of God go I. So it's kind of looking at the other person and understanding that there is a certain philosophical sense in which we are all reflections of each other, bringing out different qualities and having much more in common than we realize. Number 7, if you're not able to participate in a calm, focused, civilized manner due to hypersensitivity to the issue for whatever reason, temporarily excuse yourself from the discussion. Excessive passion interferes with clear and respectful communication. Passion which is able to express itself in a calm, intelligent, and mutually respectful manner, however, allows such exchanges to be effective, productive, and life-enhancing. Any conversation that becomes impassioned and tense and people begin shouting because they apparently aren't feeling like they're heard, it is absolutely wise and perfectly reasonable to have everyone agree to a 2-minute timeout so that we can all collect our thoughts, calm our emotions, taking a deep breath, and comparing definitions and understandings. When I look at whatever, this is what I see. When I look at whatever, this is what I see. Who's right or wrong? Well, probably they're both right, and nobody's wrong, because it has to do with standing on opposite sides, or at least on different sides of whatever the object being discussed is. Understanding that the issue is complex, whatever the particular issue is, understanding that we are all collaborators in seeking truth and love and civilization that functions without being violent toward each other. When we get so involved in shouting our position or our opinion or our perception, because we're feeling like we're not being heard, it's the harder we have to push to be heard. Well, that energy has to come from someplace, and all too often that energy comes from the perceptual, and from what you see, and goes to your voice instead. So the louder you scream, the less you see and the less you hear, because that's where the energy for that loud voice comes from, is pulling it from the other senses. You feel less through your hands and feet, you see less through your eyes, you hear less through your ears, because you're putting all your energy into your voice. Number 8, it is usually not essential that one's own opinions be included within a particular discussion, since no individual debate is ever able to encompass every valuable statement which could be said regarding any specific issue. Every debate is an ongoing debate, very much like the discussions in this show. Number 9, remember to practice active and effective listening skills, such as clarifying any vague or confusing terms before responding, and avoiding the tendency to begin formulating a response before the speaker has finished presenting his or her statement. When someone makes a statement that sounds very provocative, instead of saying, "Oh, forget that," to instead say, "Are you saying that such and such is the case?" To which the person may say, "Yes, I am," or "No, I'm not," or "I wouldn't take it that far, but I can see your point." The point is to flesh out, to explore the boundaries and the shape and the definition of whatever the issue is. If we deliberately choose harsh adversarial words, we move ourselves in the direction, we move the discussion in the direction of an irreconcilable difference. And we begin to shut down the information coming to us, and we begin to put a blindfold over our own eyes about what we can see within the discussion, instead of reaching for wisdom without biases about what that wisdom has to look like and how it has to sound and how it has to be. If we decide in advance that wisdom has to be according to what I already believe, then we will never find a wisdom that is any greater than the wisdom we already have. We will short-circuit our own growth, and we'll become absolutely stagnant and dead. I recall reading a book on listening once, and one of the fascinating things that the author mentioned, that very often people will begin composing the answer to the question they think the other person is saying, even before that person has finished articulating the entire piece. Because every person in the room is a care package from God, so to speak, a special collection of insights and perceptions and details they notice that maybe nobody else noticed. For that reason especially, all people should be encouraged to speak, and if necessary to interrupt, but in any case not to let the opportunity go by without having done all that they could within that situation. And even the most adversarial statement may still provide us with a much clearer way of articulating our own faith or beliefs. And it is in the sharing of all those stories and of all those belief systems that we begin to find a better way of being human, and a wiser and more loving way of being human. And isn't that ultimately what is the true central goal of humanity? To be more beautifully and completely humane. And finally, number 10, defend all participants' rights to speak, to be heard, and to be respected, regardless of how strongly you may disagree with their statements or opinions. Like the wonderful historical statement. I may disagree with you completely, but I will defend to the death your right to make that statement. When we lose freedom of speech, when we lose freedom of thought, when we lose freedom of being the unique person we find ourselves to be, when we lose the freedom to be something other than the embodiment of a category, we have lost ourselves and we have lost our souls. I encourage you to make all of your discussions empowering and mutually respectful ones, and that when you find yourself in conversation with someone who has a radically different perspective, consider it a golden opportunity to learn things that you might not otherwise ever see. Thank you very much for joining me.